So today we've got 4 presentations and we've got 5 speakers in there. So not in order of presentation, but we've from Uniqco, we've got Grant Andrews. From the Volvo Group, Tim Camilleri. At Charges Direct, we've got James Evelyn will be speaking, and Ross Cullen's probably listening in. And James will be working with Peter Atkinson from CoreLogic. And then we've got Damon Cole from Yurika. So first up today, we've got Tim Camilleri from the Volvo Group. So as you can see, Tim's very photographic. He didn't know that photo existed, but we found it. So Tim, I might hand over to you. I think you've, yep, you're all clear to start talking.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to talk today. As I said before, my name is Tim Camilleri, the E-Mobility Solutions Manager here at Volvo Trucks Australia, or Volvo Group Australia. So I'm going to run through today a bit of our process and our product offering as well. I had a little bit of charging information at the end, but I think the experts in the room will be better placed to do that. So I might drop that off the end. But next slide, please, Shane. This is the Volvo way and the pillars of what we do: quality, safety, and environmental care. Just showing where this approach comes from and what we're doing in this space. And the 3 pillars that not in any objection to diesel, but when it comes to our electric offerings and products and way of going, they very much stand for what we do and what we deliver. Next slide, please, Shane. The reason why this is showing here, we at Volvo Trucks International, or Volvo Group, we align with the Paris Agreement. So science-based targets here, looking to net zero by 2050, obviously on the outstretch there, but on 2030, looking to reduce the emissions of all trucks we sell worldwide and in Australia as well, by 50%. So that'll be obviously a reduction in our diesel offerings, moving to from Euro 5 to Euro 6 as a standard, but also to make sure those numbers come down, it's our zero emissions vehicles and our electric and hydrogen as well. And moving on from there. Thanks, Shane. Volvo. So just trying to show what we're aiming to do here. So it's not always known, but we have a production facility here in Brisbane. It's going to celebrate its 50th year anniversary, that facility this year. Currently build all Volvos and Max in Australia in that facility, and looking to roll that out to include electric manufacturing and production there as well by 2025. So currently reviewing the business case to make sure we can see that coming to fruition. That factory there currently is supplied by 90 local suppliers, and we spend about $125 million into the local economy nationwide on those suppliers to run that factory. Next slide, please, Shane. This is the Volvo Group and what we do. So we employ the CAR strategy, common architecture, shared technology. So while I talked to you today about trucks, it's not just trucks, it's the technology we've matured across a multitude of different applications and uses, and the componentry and parts that make up that are used across all of the products. So the same battery that goes into a bus goes into one of my trucks. So we have scale with that, but we also have research and development and assurities and maturity in the product as well as we move forward. So it's been a long journey, and it's really coming to fruition right now in seeing what we can currently deliver, or currently what's available and what's coming to the pipeline as well. Next slide, please, Shane. This is about our approach. I spoke about that earlier. What we do here is it's not just a transaction. It is a partnership. So we look to work on the first step of a pre-study and understanding your needs, your uses with the vehicles, and aligning the vehicles to those as well. So coming up with the solutions options. Stage 2, training certification is our handover period. So we make sure that drivers are comfortable with the truck, you're comfortable with charging them. Our back-end tools and systems and complete ecosystem is understood well and highly utilized. So from us, it's not just a truck. It is that holistic approach to ensure that the vehicle is understood and monitored going forward. And I'll talk about that monitoring a bit in a little bit. Next slide, please, Shane. So this is the pre-study version, the pre-study and what we do. So we really want to understand what the intended use of the vehicle is, what today's solution is. So it's how many kilometers, what weight, what accessories are coming off the battery, so we can understand and use one of our proprietary tools, electric range simulator, to understand, to show you what the vehicle is doing and how it's going to operate on that route and that daily use. So it then feeds into a lot of these other guys on the call about charging as well. So if we need to have in the middle of the day charging to ensure that the daily range is met, or overnight charging as well. So it all leads to both operations in general, wheels moving and vehicles charging as well, and then that constant monitoring as we go forward to show a lot of the outputs of the truck completely managed wirelessly, remotely, but we give you those outputs in a Volvo Connect, so you can understand how much energy, how many kilometers, how many hours, all sorts of parameters around the vehicle's operations, and then it leads into, especially with energy used, we can start to do CO2 calculations and stuff as well. Next slide, please, Shane. This is our energy range simulator that I was talking about. So this is an example in Brisbane I just mocked up, showing one of our FL vehicles, our 16-ton truck available now, just moving around Brisbane. So, and these are the outputs you kind of get. So, that vehicle's like, I just put 5 ton on it and drove it around Brisbane in the simulation. Uncannily, we've been doing real life simulations versus the electronic simulations, and they're getting eerily close to one another in their accuracy, which we are pleasantly surprised with. But here you can change the temperature, you can put in additional charging, you can put tail lifts on, all sorts of things that draw off the batteries to get an understanding of how that vehicle operates and how how you look to manage it and work with the vehicle. Next slide, please, Shane. Talk about the ecosystem before, but the electric range simulator is one part of it, but it's more than just that. It's a service contract as well. So at this current time, there is no Australian standard qualifications for working on electric trucks of high voltage like this. So the training comes from us. So with that service contract, back to us to one of our 92 dealer touch points in Australia, as they come online and be certified for our EV vehicles. As we've already started to roll that out, and, with any vehicle delivered, the required touch points will be certified. But above and beyond that, I can show there that it's a suite of software tools. You have the app on the phone showing exactly what's happening with the vehicle. You can trace it in real time. We also get a fuel efficiency output as well to show you how your drivers are working on those, performing on those vehicles. And then the last part of it, let's talk about, was the handover support. And it's not just a handover support and set of keys and away it goes, but it's ongoing. So continual driver training, logistics training, charging training, and then our back-end services training. So we hand over, for example, the electric range simulator to our partner, to our customer, for them to use to make sure they can continually review and inspect their use cases to see if ensure the vehicle aligns with their parameters. Next slide, please, Shane. I might touch on this too. I'll touch on this quite quickly, but this is just how we see the technology offering from our side of things in 2030. So down the lower, in the lower range, daily range and lower energy use is the mustardy cream color. How we see our battery electrics performing, really great around those, around town deliveries, city regional delivery and distribution, up to refuse and construction. And then when you get to the checkered patterns, where we see our hydrogen fuel cell vehicles coming online and taking over those greater distances and energy uses. And I think, and then above and beyond that is the internal combustion engine, diesel engine, living on hopefully with renewable diesels using those vehicles. But as we see this maturity move, that line of battery electrics in particular will move up and up and up into what they're capable of doing as the technology increases. And the last part I'll say about that is, with the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, they are a battery electric vehicle with a generator or a range extender on top of it. That's what the hydrogen fuel cell does for the vehicles. You still have batteries. Hydrogen fuel cell just charges them as they move. Next slide, please, Shane. Our current offering. So this is our time frame. So we have our FL and our FE in the country now, available to order with about a 6-month lead time on those. It's available now. Spots are getting limited, so I could probably promise a 6-month lead time now, but it might change in the near future. And then as we go to the FM and the FH, and our heavy duty range in the middle there, just a larger truck, larger batteries, rather than 2 or 3 electric motors in the FL and FE, three motors in the FM and FH. Higher GCM or GVM vehicles. Overall heavy duty package. And then last there shown is our hydrogen fuel cell, which is aiming for the later half of this decade. Spoke about on that earlier. Next slide, please, Shane. But as I said, available now, FL, FE, available to order, but I said limited availability at the moment. We've got a large number of order intake going through. So our build slots that we had preconditioned and pre-ordered are fast filling up. But where there's a will, there's a way. So if you're interested, please get in contact. Happy to discuss what these vehicles can do, as well as a future roadmap as well. Slide please, Shane. A little bit of detail on those 2 vehicles. Our medium duty range available now in the FL and the FE, so 16-ton truck and a 19 to 26-ton truck in the FE. So 16-ton truck for the FL. That FL, for example, up to 300 kilometers worth of range. We can go, probably we can go up to 6 batteries on that. The standard configuration is 4. It'll do 250 k's worth of range with 4 batteries. And yeah, it's with the 2 trial vehicles we've had in Melbourne with Linfox delivering VB and Woolworths, performed flawlessly. They're doing very well and great pieces of research for us and understanding that they're very much suited for Australian conditions and they're performing as expected. Next slide, please, Shane. A few configurations I thought I'd share here around what's happening globally. I haven't got any of the Australian configurations here, but Australian configurations are probably the top 2 on the right. So middle top and top right, where we've got a cold body in the Woolworths vehicle, and then we've got a dry body in the DHL truck there with the Linfox vehicle. So that's our current vehicles we're operating at the moment and how their configurations are, but there's always a multitude of different ways to fit those vehicles out with different bodies. Next slide, please, Shane. This is our heavy duty range. So this will be available, sales opening mid to late next year. And looking at those vehicles, just a bit more of their stats. So larger batteries, larger charging capability. So the FL and the FE are 150 kilowatts of charging. And then the heavy duty range here is 250 kilowatts. So, roughly, these vehicles here can be charged in 2 hours complete less than 2 hours complete from zero. Next slide, please, Shane. I will quickly touch on this and move over to the experts, I think, because I'll talk about from our side of things. Both our medium duty and our heavy duty vehicles will come in available as standard with AC and DC power for their charging. All the configurations we have running at the moment rely on just simple AC power overnight, and they do 12-hour shifts and 160, 180 kilometers in a day. And that's how they're performing quite easily. We do have that capability, as I said, as standard to go to DC charging, that rapid charging on the medium duty vehicles at that maximum rate of 150 kilowatts. You see about 1% of battery per minute going back into the vehicle. So if a truck stops for half an hour, 45 minutes, lunch break on that fast charge, you'll get 30 to 45% back into the battery or extended range for the day is what they're capable of doing. And then I think that's my last slide, please, Shane. That's it. Actually, sorry, Shane, I will apologise. Questions at the end, I'm told. I originally was going to take them here, but we'll do it at the end, hey?
Yeah, I think if we those people have got questions, you can pop them through, and at the end of it, we'll put the questions to the presenters. So, thanks, Tim, very much for that. And
no problem.
So next on, we're going to talk with James from Chargers Direct, and he'll also have Peter Atkinson, who's with CoreLogic, speaking there. So there's a couple of the characters from Chargers Direct, and there's Peter looking pretty suave. So, gentlemen, I will switch it over to yourselves. Peter,
thank you very much. Tim, thanks a lot. Very helpful to look at the trucks and see what Volvo is doing in this space. My name's James Eveland. I am the Managing Director of Chargers Direct. And today, Pete and I are going to go a bit through the EV 101 basics. So next slide, please. Chargers Direct founded in 2018 and initially serving the private commercial sectors, looking at apartment complexes, restaurants, hotels. We quickly realized that innovation was going to be the key to following this rapidly growing and evolving market, and have changed our offering based on the needs of our existing clients, only to constantly follow new technologies and new opportunities to make a more sustainable approach to electric vehicle charging. Co-creation is one of our core values, and as an end-to-end solutions provider, we take people from the question of what type of vehicle they may purchase and talking to them about range anxiety and charging, straight through to servicing and maintaining on-site chargers, training on different types of software that can allow them to monitor and manage their fleets. Next slide, please. The key to Chargers Direct is strategic partnerships. You'll see that as we offer up our next couple slides and introduce Peter Atkinson from CoreLogic. We're looking to obviously develop a portfolio of people such as IPD Group, which have a massive offering. As you'll see here on this slide, we've got over 370 employees, millions of dollars going through just from financial year 2022. And having the strength of an ASX listed company with a diverse suite of electrification and automation products, including EV charging equipment and an extensive amount of services from PLCs, different materials and hardware, and supplying to water, waste management, power, utilities and renewables, healthcare, and then back down to residential construction. So if you pop open the next slide for us, Shane. You'll see they have a product and services offering at IPD. Chargers Direct worked very closely with partners such as IPD, CoreLogic, and Adelac in order to deliver for the customer an end-to-end, as said before, from consulting straight through to management of those services and integrations with building management systems. I'll introduce Peter Atkinson now, who's one of the most technologically savvy people that I've had the honor of working with. And he'll run us through a bit of the EV 101 basics. Pete, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
James. Okay, so
muted, Pete.
Still muted?
No, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Okay, so conscious of time today, so what we're going to just touch base on
Pete,
is...
you're still muted, mate.
Hello?
We can hear Peter.
Everyone can hear me?
Yes.
Yeah? Everyone except James? Okay. All right. So what we're going to run through today is basically giving everyone on the call a baseline understanding of electric vehicle and their basic charging principles. So what we found is that despite the emergence of the industry, there tends to be a disconnect with moving forward and understanding the basics. So we'll touch on this really quickly, and we'll come back obviously at the end for any questions if someone would like to dig deeper into any of the points. So the first thing you're going to see is a new lexicon that's emerged in the industry. ICE, you'll hear around a lot, internal combustion engines, and then EVs, hopefully we all know what that is. The EVs basically break down into three segments. A battery electric vehicle, which is full electric, a plug-in hybrid, which uses a larger battery and a smaller internal combustion, and then a hybrid, which is essentially the inverse of that, a smaller electric motor and battery capacity with the internal combustion. From here, you'll hear things like EVCI, which is the electric vehicle charging infrastructure. That essentially is the entire electrification supply chain that enables your chargers to operate. So that includes chargers, switchboards, batteries, any other grid augmentation or renewable generation all goes into this aspect of it. EVSEs or charging points or chargers. And then from here, the lexicon moves to the different types of charging you may hear about. Level 1, level 2, CCS, CHAdeMO. We'll roll through a little bit of that as the presentation goes forward. Next slide, please. Okay, so AC charging as the fundamental baseline that will be typically the first experience that most people have. AC charging is in residential, but has its applications in offices, commercials, public and fleet applications as well. It's a baseline application utilized for where you can take a slower level of charge over a longer period of time. Next slide, please. So this slide here is a representation of the electric vehicles that are either in the Australian market currently or will be by the end of 2022. The purpose of this chart is to sort of showcase what the differences in range we're starting to see with electric vehicles, so ranging from 620 odd kilometers in some of the newer BMWs down to around that 200 kilometer mark. So it gives a good indication of where range anxiety, which has been a large topic, is starting to become less and less of a consideration. The next important aspects on this slide is what's called OBC, which is in the middle, which is the onboard converter in the vehicle. We'll spend a little bit more time on that in a minute. But what's important here is that you'll see in this consumer passenger vehicle class, it's roughly a 50-50 split between a 11 kilowatt and a 7 kilowatt single phase. Now there are chargers that utilize higher, excuse me. There are vehicles that will utilize higher kilowatt charging capacities on the AC side, but by and large, the industry tends to be standardizing towards this 11 and 7.5 kilowatt. On the DC side, the same argument applies. Just simply pulling into a faster charger doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a faster charge. It depends on the capacity and the capability of the vehicle, what it's able to take. Next slide, please. In the commercial vehicle space, we just heard from Tim, we see his Volvo trucks up there, pride of place at the top. But so these are some of the other vehicles that you'll see that's in the Australian market. That's either here now or coming in the near future. You'll have to excuse me, guys. I'm feeling a little unwell. So if I drop off, James, you'll have to take over for me. So some of these vehicles are available now from direct OEMs, and others are converts from existing vehicles, such as what C Electric and Genesis undertake. Next slide, please. So two charging principles. You have DC charging, whereas a direct supply directly into the battery, and then you have AC charging, where you run through onboard charger or onboard converter that's in every single electric vehicle, and that converts your AC power into DC. Next, please. I just jumped through a couple. Okay, perfect. Go back one, if we can. All right. So the main principles here. This is a level one AC charger. So prior to that, the slide that we just missed, every vehicle that comes out will come with essentially a 10 amp, a lead with a 10 amp socket outlet that plugs into a general purpose outlet inside your house. That will deliver roughly 2 kilowatts, 2.3 kilowatts of power to your vehicle. It's really, due to the slow speed, it should really only be considered as an emergency charging option. So from there, you move to what we see here, which is basically a level 2 charger. The level 2 chargers incorporate a dedicated wall box. So there is a larger cable, which is run a dedicated circuit to these charging points. And you will typically find they will be in either a 7.5, 11 or 22 kilowatt variant. There are a few more sizes around, but they're predominantly what you will see from most manufacturers in the market. Next slide, please. Just jump through a couple here. So what we have, this is what your charging plug looks like. So what's happening in here? The central pin is your earth pin, which goes through and binds the earthing of your charger to your electric vehicle. The next two at the top are particularly important. The PP pin, your proximity pilot, this is what basically tells your vehicle that you're plugged into a charger. It disables the vehicle so you can't drive off with the charger still attached and rip the charger off of the wall. The CP pin, in a simplistic terms, provides communication backwards and forwards between the charger and the charging station to indicate things such as state of charge, to tell the charger to ramp up or ramp down its speed based on the temperature of the batteries and the capacity of the vehicle. Another couple of clicks, please. The next two will then be on a single phase 7 kilowatt. These are the pins that will be active. And then the final click will be the on the variants for 3-phase power. So that's what's happening when we look at your charging plug. Next slide, please. So here we have a nice little trap that's in the market that makes things more complex than what industry really needs to be. So we have a 7.5 kilowatt vehicle in blue. We have an 11 kilowatt vehicle in the grey. Just give us a couple of advances, please. All right. So obviously a 7.4 will charge at 7.4 on a 7.4 charger. And say 11 will charge at 11 on an 11. Go one more. So, however, once we go across to a 7.4 charging on an 11, logic would tend to indicate that our car should charge faster. Unfortunately, this isn't in most cases going to be correct. One more advance. The reason for that is essentially the capacity of that charger on an amperage draw is limited at 16 amps. To supply 7.4 kilowatts over a single phase, you need 32. So the physical capabilities aren't there to support that. Now, conversely, if we advance another 2 clicks, please. The 11 kilowatt, when it steps down to a 7.4, this could be either of these scenarios. Depending on the vehicle manufacturer, whether they have built the vehicle to handle a higher current draw over a single phase leg will dictate whether it charges at 7.4 rating of the charger, or whether it steps it back to only being a maximum of a 16 amp draw on a single leg. So if we jump to the next slide, and I'll just get you to go 3 or 4 clicks forward. Keep going, keep going. Okay, we'll stop there. So a good solution in around this, and not to the detriment of 11 kilowatt topology, is that for the general consumer, so they don't need to be concerned about all these particular parameters, is a mix between 22 and 7.5 kilowatt single phase makes the charging process for the layperson simpler. You see there the charging rates that you'll experience simply just due to how the vehicle infrastructure and how the cabling to the hardware is configured. Next, please. So the chargers themselves on the AC side will either come with a cable pre-attached or with a socket. If it comes with a socket, most EV owners will have a cable somewhat similar to what's shown in the middle in order to make use of that. They both operate exactly the same. The choice of hardware really is dependent upon application, environment of installation, and the charging experience that you would like to enable for the people that's going to utilize your charger. Next, please. Keep going. Okay. Tim touched a little bit on the charging plugs and standards. So the AC charging plug we've just gone through on the left. The predominant charging plug that we'll see on most vehicles will be the CCS plug. It stands for Combined Charging Standard. intelligently named because it combines AC and DC into the one plug format. The AC is obviously handled up the top. The DC is handled by the two larger pins down the bottom. The one on the right-hand side is the CHAdeMO charger. Now, that particular charging stand is typically used by your Japanese or your French vehicle manufacturers. And in the instances for vehicles fitted with that, what you will see is a larger fuel flap or charging port where you'll have a separate AC charging port and the CHAdeMO charging port as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so authorization, all very well and good. How do we get the vehicles to talk to the charger and start charging? There's a few different ways. So for behind the fence application, you can enable your chargers to basically pull up, plug in, and they will commence charging. Anywhere where you need to monitor or regulate the users, however, will typically require either an app or an RFID card or some other authorization process to identify and start the charging session. For fleet applications, there are bespoke software suites out there that will assist depot and fleet managers to control the larger queue of vehicles that are likely going to be within their depot and gain insights into the utilization parameters of each of those fleet vehicles. Next slide, please. And then the final aspect is billing and revenue. So if you're in an application where you wish to charge separate divisions for use of the charging stations, or your charging stations sit in a public accessible area where the general public can also utilize it, you'll need to have some type of billing and revenue software that's associated with your chargers. So where it's an in-house and the users are known, depending on the charging manufacturer, the chargers may very well come with their own pre-built tariff and billing management systems included, by which the facility operator can download the charging usage and charge it to a division. Once you move outside of that and you have general public charging, this is where you will need to have a third-party back-end for someone that can handle the credit card or subscription registration payment processing and authorize the charging sessions and bill the clients and return revenue back to your business. That's all I've got time for today. I hope it wasn't too fast. I'll hand back to James and I'll talk to you all at the end. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Pete. That was fantastic. Look, if you have questions or there's anything that you missed, don't be shy to drop something in the chat and we can follow it up at the Q&A section. After this, I believe there's a couple more presenters, so they may touch on some of the similar topics. Also, bear in mind, as much as that's a lot to take in as just the basics, companies like ourselves and others out there play the role of gathering all of this information, suggesting the appropriate approach for your business or your corporate portfolio or your house. So don't be shy to reach out to one of your charging specialists and ask further questions if it seems like a lot to take in now. Thank you very much. Back to you, Local Buy.
Thank you, James, and thank you, Peter. So next up, we've got Grant Andrews from Uniqco. So Grant, I'll hand it over to you. There's his photo when he was very, very professional.
As if I haven't become less professional, obviously. Thanks, Shane. I'm not sure who's watching this video, but I just wanted to people to understand my background is the motor vehicle industry. I have limited knowledge on the electrical side of things, but I'm an avid reader and I have certainly read up. It's the most fascinating. I've been in the motor vehicle industry for 50 plus years, and it is the most fascinating period we're going to have in the future. So what happened? Well, the world suddenly started to take attention and understand that if we don't reach net zero by 2050, we're in all sorts of trouble in relation to climate change. So this whole drive towards net zero is also for our children and their children in the future. So what's net zero from a global perspective? It's all about moving away from carbon-based fuel sources, removing carbon from the atmosphere and locking it away. And the aim is no greenhouse gas emission by 2050. What does it mean for Australia? It means a 26 to 28% reduction in greenhouse gas from 2005 level to 2030, and then an aim of getting to net zero by 2050. And it's interesting, I was listening to the ABC yesterday while I was working, of course, and they're actually talking and teaching farmers how to measure their greenhouse gas and their emissions, and you know, things like herds of cattle and all of that sort of stuff. They also contribute to greenhouse emissions. So don't get embarrassed. You drive a car, you do contribute to it, certainly, but there's a whole lot that's involved here. All states are targeting net zero emissions by 2050. Victoria, Queensland and Northern Territory have a 50% renewable energy target by 2030. That means they are going to have to get their skates on. Commonwealth have incentives for technology deployment. So what's the job of a council? And I guess we've got a lot of council people talking to us. The council is to plan for net zero before 2050. Now, the only way you can do that is to actually sit down and work out a plan. It's just like a normal project. I'm going to build a road, I'm going to build a series of drains, I'm going to do this. You need to look at all the factors. Factors being, what are we going to do with the charger technology? What are we going to do and how we're going to roll out that infrastructure? Are we going to charge our potential clients on the public network? All of those sorts of things every council needs to consider, and it needs to be written into their net zero plan. Next slide, please, Shane. So expectations are growing in the sector for the transition towards electric fleet. Moving your organisation to net zero fleet will require a totally different mindset. And from the previous speakers, I've already gathered they left me in their wake a little bit, but I certainly understand that we're going to have to change the way we think. Tackling this challenge will require new approaches and new ways of thinking. We've got to reimagine how we're going to use data to identify the required fleet which will transition to EVs. You've got to sit down and look at your fleet and say, everybody's going, oh, well, that's easy. I'll take a few cars and I'll transition and that'll be a good look. It can't just be a good look. You've got to look at your cars, you've got to look at your mowers, you've got to look at your sweepers, anything that's going to be able to become electric, you've got to put in your plan. You're also going to have to think about your procurement process, how best value is defined, how it's weighted, your selection criteria and how it's determined. You need to reconsider the way we think about procurement, ownership and funding of EV fleets. There's going to be a massive drive, and we heard a little bit about it, there's going to be a massive drive to maintain the vehicles in-house because of the lag in training of people to do stuff in their own workshop. Some EV suppliers are already saying you can't actually buy the vehicle, you can lease it. I don't have a problem with any of those approaches because at the end of the day, it delivers our net zero target fast and efficiently. The other thing is, as a fleet manager, you can't tackle this business on your own. You have to bring in your sustainability people and you have to bring in your infrastructure people, because the infrastructure people are going to be the people that work with the charger networks, and the sustainability people are going to work with offsetting your carbon outputs, because there's a lot of equipment and machinery that will be very slow to transition to electric or hydrogen outputs. Next slide, please, Shane. So what I did was I did a bit of research, and referring back to the previous speakers, just took a really simple look at AC versus DC charging. I'm not critical of it. I think it's fantastic because everybody needs to understand, while there is range anxiety out there, we actually monitor over 40,000 vehicle assets in our data analytics software. Those are clients we've had over the years, we've accumulated over the years, and we've got a lot of data about who does what already with their ICE vehicles. And I can tell you, even with a range of 250, nobody's going to get too upset, because at the end of the day, most of our clients are traveling a maximum of about 30 to 40 kilometers a day. You do get the exceptions, so that's all very well. We're just going to have to deal with those exceptions. But nobody should have range anxiety. Now, it's interesting to see, as you move up in the price range, you get shorter and shorter charging times. And also, we're just related to the AC charging, home charging in the household situation, to the DC fast charge. And a DC fast charge is definitely going to get you there, but you'll see that the top three, for instance, irrespective of how hard you try and push the power into them, they're going to throttle it back to 44, 50 and 46 kilowatts anyway. Just in case you want to know where to research that sort of stuff, there is an EV database, but I'm sure the charger guys can help you. I'm not an expert, but this is just an excerpt of what I got out of the system. Next slide, please, Shane. So the other part of transitioning, don't just sit and think, oh, well, we'll never get there. We'll have to wait for our charger stations. I think a very good first step, and remember, most of you are changing your vehicles somewhere in 5 years or 150,000 Ks, particularly your light vehicle fleet. If you consider a plug-in electric hybrid vehicle or just a hybrid vehicle, you're actually taking the first step. Now, I particularly like the plug-in electric hybrid vehicle because if I can relate back to the person who only does 30 Ks a day, it gets them into the discipline of plugging in their car every night when they come home, and then they're driving on full electric to work and back, so their actual fuel consumption is negligible. They don't necessarily have to have a charger set up at home if their organisation provides chargers as an incentive at work. So you can look at it the other way around. While they're at work doing their normal daily tasks, they can plug in their vehicle there and they don't have to have a charger at home. While it's not as inexpensive as an ICE vehicle, they're actually lower cost, but they are a great specification. Resale value, particularly for plug-in electric hybrid vehicles, is going through the roof. I know when the old Mitsubishi was first the Outlander plug-in electric vehicle, everybody said, oh no, I don't ever want to buy one of those. Let me tell you, their resale value is absolutely fantastic and set to soar through the roof. Next slide, please, Shane. The final slide for me is, if you're not telling your elected members what you're doing, you're absolutely out of the ballpark already, because you need to understand, this is one of my clients and they are virtually at an offset. If you can see, their trees that they planted have offset the majority of their emissions in their light and heavy vehicles. You need to be able to represent this to the public, show it on the screen as they walk into your organisation, We are working towards your net zero targets that you set us, and this is how we're doing it in our fleet. You can't do this without advertising and showing what great work you're doing, because everybody's just going to say, well, they're not doing any work because they're great. The public's great at knocking every bit of local government that they can find. You can't wait till 2028 to review your progress. Put a line in the sand now, figure out where you are, and then take it from there. Thanks, Shane. That's my bit, and I look forward to the questions at the end of the session.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Grant, for that. And so next up, I'm hoping we've got Damon from Yurika. Yurika is the Energy Services and Infrastructure Operation of Energy Queensland. Damon, here we go. Damon, are you online there, mate? I can't see you. I know you were having some issues earlier. Okay, let's see where he's hiding. He's raised his hand. Just a moment, Damon.
Hello.
There we go.
Excellent, and apologies, my camera doesn't seem to be working, but maybe
right.
that's to the betterment of all of the viewers anyway. Thank you for the opportunity. Really have a bunch of wonderful insights from some of the other speakers, and much of what I'll talk to are really complementary to some of the points noted, but the topic today for me was going to be about the cars and the chargers and the infrastructure aspect. And there's a bit of experience we can talk to, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. What I thought I'd start to do is bamboozle you with all of the acronyms. This is an industry that's going to be full of new acronyms. It's a new way of talking. Rest assured, you don't have to memorize these now. There is no questionnaire at the end. But if it is of interest, I'll ask that Shane disseminate this, just so that you can get understanding of some of the nuances that the industry's now having to learn. Next slide, please. So today I sought to talk to two key areas. One was about the electrification of fleets and plant equipment, and then about the building of infrastructure for electric vehicles. Next slide, please. And again. So I've been market facing with our EV infrastructure works probably for the last year or so. I have every inbound call and inquiry from local government all the way down to residential applications. And this is always the key question. What am I doing first? Is it the cart or the horse? The analogy I'm sure everyone understands, but the methodology is still as relevant today. Next slide, please. So if you build it, will they come? As the old saying goes, from the famous Kevin Costner movie. But if you go to the next slide, what I can talk to you today about is that Yurika built it, and we can assure you that electric vehicles are coming. This is a visual map of what we call the Queensland Electric Superhighway, or another acronym that we commonly throw around called the CESH. The CESH was a electric vehicle network that Yurika initiated in 2017. And then worked with Department of Transport and Main Roads for further rollout. We're now in our third stage, which I'm actually overseeing as the project lead, for another 18 sites that are all those inland ones on the green lines and dots. So by the end of October this year, we should have completed 49 EV charging sites. Each site has a minimum of 2 EV chargers throughout the state of Queensland. So the wonderful catch cry that we've loved to promote and spruik is this: it's the largest single connected EV charging network in a state in the world. Don't you love marketing? But again, this is a network that from Coolangatta to Cairns is 2,000 kilometres of EV charging infrastructure. And so over the time and over the stages of this, we've had a number of lessons about how sites are constructed, how they're being used, and the behavioural nuances that support them. Next slide, please. So whilst I can show you a couple of pretty pictures, our aim is to share the lessons that we've learned along the way. Next slide, please. The key thing, I believe, is everything comes down to the site itself. What makes it work? Now, you may be able to read the points there, points 2, 3, 4, 5 to 8. They're all the tangible and practical things, but there is an intangible aspect to this. EV drivers of all kinds are going to want convenience. They're used to a convenience called a petrol station. What's now evolving is they don't want to be driving down back alleyways and hidden lots just to find an EV station because it met the requirement of good constructability and availability to power. These are key considerations, but I always like to believe that first and foremost, what makes the site work is a key factor, and it's an intangible factor, but a key factor as to why EV charging will become more useful. To talk to availability of power, this is one of the key requirements that we are faced with constantly. I frequently get the call of saying, I want an EV charging station, how much? Now, whilst I can comfortably give a cost for the cost of the station itself and some assumptions around some basic installations, we need to identify, are we placing it near to an existing point of connection? Is it far away? Is there civil works that need to be involved? Do we have to dig up concrete and bitumen and run cables for miles? Are we mounting this against a wall or a floor? What's the difference between a wall and a floor mounted charger, you might ask? But from the technology of the charger itself, there's very little. But insofar as the type of application that we're looking at, there can be considerations. Environmental protection. Is the nominated charger going to be exposed to direct sunlight all day? Is the site prone to flooding? Are these considerations that we have to look at, or potentially even tree or shade coverage? What happens when it's a wet weather day? And finally, things such as amenities. If you're opening this up to the general public, and this is a further discussion, but will there be accessibility to toilets, food, Wi-Fi, a safe rest area? Will there be signage? And what I mean by signage is there's a legal requirement for signage in painting the bays green and putting a sign up to say that this is an EV charging bay. But will you want general public to find this? Are they finding it from a freeway? How far from the local transit connection to the EV charging site will you have to sign in order to maximize visibility? Now, while some people will say, but most EVs nowadays actually have some clever smarts within them that can identify where all the chargers are using a series of platforms, I don't think this can be relied upon as a technology in all vehicles. And then, of course, lastly, road traffic management. Now, this is probably more around the DA considerations. How are you accessing the bay? Is there road traffic management that needs to be considered? Again, these are all part of the complex bundle of questions that need to be asked in why would we think about site A versus site B or site C. Next slide, please. As identified by some of the other presenters, and that they did a much better job visually than I've done here, but in the interest of keeping it very simple, what charger types? What's interesting about a charger type? As some of the previous presenters identified, there's level 1, 2, and 3 chargers, there's AC and DC chargers. Now, there's going to be variability as to the types of vehicles, but each of those chargers, a level 1 charger is significantly less expensive as a cost than a level 3 charger. However, a level 3 charger will charge the car a lot faster. But the question then begs is, what sort of vehicles are we charging? If we're making this open to general public, it's a very different consideration than it would be to a fleet that may pick one type of vehicle and have that plan for the short and medium term. But to give some idea of cost, because that's always an important consideration, a level 1 charger you could buy in the market wholesale between the cost of $1,000 to $3,000. A level 2 charger could range between $2,000 to $8,000, depending on the functions, the features, the optionality. And a level 3 charger we're seeing in the market, and this again is highly dependent on size, can range from $40,000 to $175,000 just for the cost of the charger. This obviously excludes the costs that I'm always trying to highlight, which is the civils, the trenching, the cable trays, upgrades to distribution boards, bay painting, signage, or importantly, improved communications to the site. So this isn't always an underestimated one. Somebody just assumes, well, surely we'll just put a 5G chip into it. That may or may not be a cost-effective consideration. My aim is to always expose this out as best possible so we have a proper CapEx picture. And this is why I've simplified it in red and green boxes. The CapEx picture then also needs to work against an OpEx. So what are our costs for electricity? What are we foreseeing as ongoing maintenance? What's the revenue, if any revenue? Are we going to get interdepartmental revenue, or are you going to open it to general public? And if you are to open it to general public, there are some providers out there that look for cross-promotional opportunities, i.e. just have some advertising billboard right beside it. These are all just a part of the consideration mix. Next slide, please. So just to give you an idea, so how we see the landscape of EV charging infrastructure is, as mentioned before, you have some wall-mounted units, and typically these have been positioned for private home or apartments, what we like to call behind the meter. These categories aren't definitive by any sense. Fleet chargers, of course, in our experience, start at around 22 kilowatts, and they can be pedestal or floor mounted. But then you start to step up to 50 to 100 kilowatt chargers, and this is where what we call fast DC charging is available in market. But then we've also got highway chargers all the way up to full industrial chargers and bus chargers. So whilst I can oversimplify this by saying we're providing a series of glorified PowerPoints, it's important to understand what type of charge are you wanting from said PowerPoint, the frequency of charge, how long do people want to use the charge for. These are all part of the key considerations in the infrastructure. Next slide, please. So what we like to talk to is what's the operability? What's the life after install? Because this is just as important as the CapEx. What I'm showing here is a picture of the monitoring portal that we have of our own network in order to identify the uptime of each asset. So what's important to us and what will be important to you as well is the full functionality of this working consistently. There is nothing angrier than somebody who can't fill up their car. So uptime is just as important, the identifying the fault and being able to see if that fault is going to be a technology glitch or requires somebody to go to site is probably one of the more important factors. Otherwise, you're constantly paying for what we call truck roll, of somebody to go to site and flick a switch. And in every instance, we'll seek to avoid that where possible. But it's really calling out, what are your expectations? Because the market is quite new, particularly in Australia. Everyone has an expectation that if it's off, I need it up immediately. But like everything, with speed comes cost. So if cost isn't an issue, of course, we can get people there in minutes, but we need to talk through what are the expectations for uptime. If this is a fleet of buses that's doing the same route every day, and that said charger is down, that means that there's an immediate lost revenue. And so the uptime of that charger is imperative. Whereas if this was one of 7 chargers, which was charging one of 7 cars and other cars were available and we could get there within 24 to 48 hours, there's a very different expectation. But the aim is to call this out so that we can identify how the service model needs to be built to support that expectation. And it's really whether the charges are going to be restricted access for fleet or available to general public. And if it is open to general public, how are you going to manage the billing? So billing occurs a number of ways, normally via a QR code and a pre-registered app, or it's now becoming common, credit card readers. So people can do a point of sale, but is this something that you're wanting to manage or you're wanting somebody to manage externally? All questions, all relevant, but all part of the puzzle. Next slide, please. One more. So for me, fleet considerations. Do you have an EV transition plan? What are the intended vehicle uses and their routes? How much do you anticipate your transition into EVs will scale year on year? And the year on year is a very important part, but I'll get to in a sec. But what's important to your fleet about transitioning to EV? So we all know that everyone loves to take a photograph in front of an EV and put it on their LinkedIn or their Facebook, at least tell the story of what it feels like to drive it. But importantly, this is still a commercial decision. The commercial decision then needs to support how many charging locations are you going to need? Now, if it was a local government authority and you had one depot, and we're only looking at charges at one depot, it's perfectly fine. But if the vehicles you're choosing can go 400 kilometers out into the further regions of your local government area, maybe we need to look at third-party sites. Are they sites that you own? These are all the considerations that we're wanting to provide just to ensure that the users of the fleet have options. And then when we get there to the electrical infrastructure at each of these locations, how does this work? But let's go to the next slide. So in a simple graphical term, if your EV fleet was these wonderful representation of 2 or 3 cars and you only have 2 chargers, they could be easily connected into an electrical distribution board. It flows on through to the transformer, which of course is then connected to the grid. If you could click the button. Then one car comes in, click again. More cars come in, click again. More cars means more chargers. More chargers, click again. Needs us to look at the distribution board. Are the distribution boards there capable of handling the load that all of these chargers are going to need? And if you click again, are we having to look for cable upgrades between the distribution board to either the meter or the local transformer? If you could click again. Once we get to a certain point, there's always a capacity issue at the transformer level. Are we needing to upgrade the transformer, put a new transformer in? These are all considerations for as the fleet grows. If you could click again. Then we may have to look at grid applications. This is the world in which we dance with frequently. This is about understanding what is the infrastructure that's here, what is the load that all of these chargers and vehicles are going to be putting onto that grid, and how can we find a more efficient way of not having to just fork out money for transformers and larger electrical infrastructure. And if you click again, and potentially even explore how solar, batteries, or load minimization can be considered in this context. So these are all fields that we specialize in. Our view is how do we provide you the solution and the outcome you need at the bare minimum of unnecessarily spending money on infrastructure. If you click again. Delightful to say that our sister entity, so Yurika is a subsidiary of Energy Queensland, as is Energex. We have no direct relation to them except for that we're both subsidiaries of Energy Queensland. But they recently did a study last year to identify how many registrations were in Queensland. Now, 6,258 EVs, including 24 buses, are registered into the grid. And over 90% of those are registered in Southeast Queensland. If you could click again. This is a re-representation of a graph that I was able to access from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. So this is one of the industry's leading analysts, both locally and globally. And this was a comparison of, in 2022, 2% of all cars registered in Australia were an EV. The forecast is by 2030, 19% of all cars will be an electric vehicle. So the question that I seek to present to you is, if this is a forecast, and as we know with all forecasts, it's a bit of crystal balling, but if this is the forecast of how passenger vehicles are entering the market, and by the way, I believe this statistic is mostly derived on passenger, not light commercial, what's your plan to support that? As these vehicles arrive, are you wanting to take advantage of Joe Public arriving in the LGA where they'll seek EV charging, or is this an exclusive consideration for your fleet? Next slide, please. So what's the current alternative? And if you click my crystal ball, if you could click again, what we've started to see in Australia more frequently is the cost of petrol. And if you could click again, but the crystal ball isn't always right. If you click again, I think it's important to highlight that there's a true momentum happening with electric vehicle in Australia. We're seeing everything from AGL and state governments really putting emphasis and initiative behind electric vehicle charging because they can see that the demand is changing. They can see that both consumers and businesses are exploring ways to reduce costs, adapt into this new technology. Next slide, please. And at a high level, what's our objective? We're system integrators. we take the view that we provide energy infrastructure. We take pride in efficiently engineering, constructing infrastructure with long-term operation in mind. And this is across our business, from solar systems to high voltage assets, all the way down to battery energy systems and EV charging. So if we can find ways to reduce your energy costs by leveraging these generation tools like solar, batteries, and metering, our aim is to provide and deliver infrastructure which can operate for you at the lowest possible costs. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Damon. And so what we might do is I'm just going to go up there and anybody that's put Mr. or Mrs. Anonymous is asking about the lifespan of batteries. So I'm making an assumption we're talking about batteries in the vehicle themselves. I'm not sure that we've got anybody from a vehicle manufacturer, unless they're as an attendee there. What I can say, and maybe Tim, you've got something there from Volvo's experience.
Yeah, sure. I think it's an interesting question because, you know, from our side of things, especially when you talk about the word lifespan, the first life of the vehicle intended with our trucks is 8 years. That end of the 8 years, the batteries move from 100% to an 80% capacity. So at that point, we don't deem them appropriate for in-motion life. So we've got a department within Volvo called Volvo Energy, looking, and some of the other guys on the call here, but, you know, or Damon in particular, those batteries going into a second life as energy storage for solar and renewables and things like that. But as part of all that, in that lifespan, it's we're looking to be able to recondition them, change cells out in create a battery pack, and at an end of life, a true end of life, they'll be recyclable. So at the moment they're over 90% recyclable, and I'm talking for Volvo on that, but that is kind of an industry standard, around over 90% recyclable in their batteries. Expensive to replace. Well, you know, we've got warranties in place for that, and our service contracts associated with the trucks to mitigate if there are any replacements required.
Okay, thanks, Tim. So I can give a personal perspective because, as some of you may know, I've been driving an EV for 4.5 years now, a BMW i3. I've done just over 100,000 Ks in that, and a good mix of city and highway driving. I've probably lost about 10% of the battery's capacity for in that time. So when I initially had the vehicle, I was averaging about 250 kilometres per charge, and now that's sort of coming down to the low 200s. So it's always a bit disappointing. You know, it's a bit like running out of petrol when you didn't expect to, but it's one of those things that as an EV driver, you're looking at that gauge just like you'd look at a fuel gauge in a car and keeping an eye on where you're at. So I'm not, yeah.
If I may as well, broadly speaking, battery technology is still, there's a lot to be learned about. There's hundreds of different battery compositions, and each of those have very different degradation cycles and curves. I think at a high level, it's very important to just focus on warranties for now. Many OEMs and manufacturers are still identifying nuances. They're testing against environments. So it's fair to say that there is no certainty. But EVs around the world have only been in the market for maybe 8 to 10 years, whereas internal combustion engines have hundreds of years, and they've had all that time to iron out all their kinks. But by no means would I suggest that there's any extreme risk in a 5-year term with battery life in EVs.
Okay, and as a follow-up on that question, the type of charging, whether AC or DC charging, impact the life of the battery. I think we've all experienced issues with our good old mobile phones, and we wonder whether we should be charging them all the time and what type of charge. Is there any, Tim, I'm going to throw this one to you again because you've possibly got some experience through Volvo with that.
Look, it does, but the way in which we manage it through software and our battery management system, it has an impact, but it's not as great as probably perceived. I think, you know, the software and the software limiting how and which the vehicles are charged, in terms of not allowing 100% of the battery to be accessible to charging, keeps the battery in good nick. So to be fair, actually the DC charging will impact on life, but it's not considerable. And we monitor and manage all that on the back end to make sure, see what the battery life is doing, and takes into consideration AC and DC charging distribution. And again, I've come from a Volvo point of view, but you know, that's how we care for it and consider it.
Excellent. And then we've got a question from Michael from Rockhampton. This is probably something for Damon here. They've experienced some resistance from the Ergon side about installing charging infrastructure. Damien, are you still with us?
Yeah, absolutely. Look,
can you see that question on the screen?
I don't see the question on the screen, unfortunately, but
they've had some resistance from Ergon Energy in respect to installing charging infrastructure.
Yep.
And has there been studies into network capacity and how much it may limit infrastructure build?
Look, it's certainly a key consideration. I think one of the things that we can't oversimplify is that any charger can just be simply connected to any piece of electrical transformer or point of connection, and that Ergon will accept. There is some serious consideration around where are you connecting, because fundamentally, if you're putting any imposition onto their infrastructure, or their infrastructure is already at load, they're just going to say, well, pay, or no, we don't want to connect. So we take the view that our experience is about helping navigate that. There may need to be flexibility in the site consideration, which is an important factor, because I appreciate it if you're one council, you're looking at one asset, or as a building or a business would, they may say, well, this is our one asset. I want to connect here, and that's my one transformer. And if that doesn't become effective, you may not have other options. But it really does come down to an exploration of what type of charger are you looking at? What's the point of connection? Is that the only transformer or point of connection that we can explore? And our experience typically is maybe the charger is too big a connection. So we then may need to explore AC 22 kilowatt chargers versus fast DC chargers. But without knowing the case and the complexity, that's the best I could provide at a high level.
Excellent. Thank you for that. I hope that answered your question, Michael. However, I'm not seeing any other questions coming up, which I'm not sure whether that's good or bad. However, if you've got any questions that that come up after today, feel free to send them through to myself, and I can then distribute it out to the presenters according to what their question and what their expertise is. So if we don't have any more questions, I will we'll wrap this webinar up. Once again, I'd like to thank the presenters from each of those companies, and of course, those of you who are attending. I appreciate that input. And anybody else got something they'd like to say before I close the meeting?
Shane, I'd just like to thank you very much. You participated in 2 of our webinars, actually 3 of our webinars so far. We run webinars every second month, and we've got a lot of interested people all over Australia, not just in Queensland. So we've got next webinar, I'll be sending you the invite so you can get it out to all your local bike people. Thanks very much, Shane.
No problem.
We've got another Q&A that just popped up as well.
Yes, I just spotted that one. So this is a question again for Damon. It would seem from your presentation and data that electric trucks are not highly considered in the infrastructure planning. Could you kindly elaborate further on this, how trucks may be catered for going forward from an infrastructure perspective?
Insofar as the infrastructure, and you'll have to excuse me, I think the data that's predominant in the market is all around passenger fleet. And Tim, forgive me if there's links or sites that I probably should be more familiar with. Where we've seen infrastructure requests and opportunities for light commercial and heavy commercial, it's typically in a behind the meter or as an operator's capacity. What does it broadly mean? It normally means bigger charges. So it's understanding what is the kind of vehicles that you're intending to bring in. And we reverse engineer the problem. What are the vehicles that you're trying to bring in this year, next year, all the way up to 2030? What's the capacity of charging required for those? And so we seek to engage in with the vehicle OEMs and then define a plan to develop infrastructure that suits that growing need. To date, I don't believe there really has been, except for what Volvo have been doing in market, there's no true commercial offer yet for light commercial. And please, Tim, jump in if I'm correct with this, but it just hasn't been a predominant offer in market yet. So we're all excited. Oh, sorry, with the exception to buses. As noted, there's 24 buses, electric vehicle buses that are registered in Queensland. There's 2 known bus depots in New South Wales and Victoria that are now exploring how and when to integrate bus fleets into the network. But all of those chargers and charging infrastructure is nominated at their depots. So we're not having to look at this in a outside of the depot environment. But look, any inquiries that you have, if we'd be more than happy to help and explore through. But by no means is there a suggestion that light commercial is not going to be a thing in Australia. I actually believe there will be a rapid uptake. It's just that we haven't seen the historical data yet in country.
Yeah, Damon, just to touch on that, and I guess our personal experiences is there aren't many physical bays in which we've been able to park a truck and not block traffic or take up multiple bays, or so from a physical side of things, and there is interest for on route charging from trucks, or that publicly available infrastructure where they have an OPEX cost, an operating cost rather than an outlay cost, so they can use that shared infrastructure. But the other thing as well is with your old PK50s that you installed in phase 1, they only go up to 480 volts. So not a high enough voltage system for us to run our trucks, for example. And that's a bit of the, and I think, while I do appreciate that electric heavy vehicles are new to Australia, the uptake should be quite quick, and considerations in future planning for bits of concrete on the other side of a charger or adjacent to passenger vehicles, bays for heavy vehicles would be enable the industry to grow a little bit faster, I'd say.
Yep, and I'd definitely support your view that I think light commercial will have a stronger growth than passenger vehicles in many respects. Passenger vehicles are more of an emotional purchase. But for light commercial, it's fundamentally a business case. And if those business cases stack up, we're seeing that there's definitely a higher level of inquiry in trying to understand it now. And I suppose that's the ambition of today too, is to expose all the key considerations so that you can make your own plans, and we're all here to support you.
I believe in the private sector too, there's been some interest through Chargers Direct, a couple clients that we've been speaking to that are already considering supporting infrastructure upgrades in a private nature as opposed to a public or government driven, in order to promote growth inland of normal trucking routes that may become electric in the future. So that's not to say that if there's not mass amounts of truck adoption information out there yet, that won't change in 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, and look, you raise a good point. I think it's also important to raise to everyone that's here is that the ARENA has just recently come out with another future fuels program with the ambition of incentivizing fleets. Definitely worth a read for anyone that's considering how to modify their fleet, because it's not limited to passenger vehicles.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, and all the attendees. I've just put up on the screen, you might see, I'll be running a couple of more webinars, one in April around supply and logistics issues, and then another one on vehicle and plant machinery safety. So stay tuned for those. And Grant's going to give me a link in the future for his future webinars that he'll be running, and I'll send that out to all our council contacts so they can tap in. So, with no more questions, I let you all run off and have some lunch if you haven't already eaten. And yeah,
Perfect.
Thank you,
Shane. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Okay. See ya.